China's President Xi Jinping has made a rare and highly symbolic visit to Tibet, marking the 60th anniversary of Beijing's contested rule over the Himalayan region. The trip, carefully choreographed by state media, highlights not only the Chinese government's determination to reinforce its authority in the restive territory but also its intention to project an image of unity, stability, and prosperity under Communist Party leadership. For decades, Tibet has remained one of the most sensitive regions for Beijing, both politically and culturally, given its unique religious identity, history of autonomy, and the exile of its spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. President Xi Jinping's journey to Tibet is significant because Chinese leaders seldom travel to the region, especially given its political volatility. His last reported visit was in 2011, when he was vice president. This time, his presence marks the 60th anniversary of what Beijing calls Tibet's peaceful liberation, a phrase rejected by many Tibetans who instead refer to it as the beginning of suppression, cultural erosion, and the forced integration of their homeland into the People's Republic of China. State broadcaster CCTV aired footage of Xi walking through the streets of Lhasa, visiting monasteries, speaking to monks, and addressing crowds waving Chinese flags. The images were designed to present him as a leader deeply connected with the Tibetan people and committed to their well-being. Yet, independent analysts suggest the visit was more about strengthening political control, boosting nationalism, and showcasing development projects than about genuine dialogue with local communities. The Chinese government has long maintained that Tibet's integration into China was a historic correction, ending centuries of feudal rule under the Tibetan religious hierarchy. According to Beijing, the arrival of the People's Liberation Army in 1951 freed Tibetans from poverty, backwardness, and exploitation by aristocrats and monasteries. State media coverage of Xi's visit repeatedly emphasized themes of modernization, economic growth, and ethnic unity under the Communist Party. For Tibetans in exile, however, the 1950s mark a very different chapter. The 1959 uprising against Chinese rule ended with a brutal crackdown and the flight of the Dalai Lama to India, where he continues to live in Dharamshala. Human rights groups argue that since then, Tibet has endured heavy militarization, strict religious controls, restrictions on language and culture, and widespread surveillance. Xi's trip, therefore, symbolizes not reconciliation but the consolidation of state power over a region whose people remain largely excluded from political decision-making. One of the key messages of Xi's visit was economic development. Tibet has seen massive infrastructure spending under China's Western development strategy, which aims to integrate remote border regions into the national economy. During his trip, Xi inaugurated and inspected major projects, including sections of the newly built high-speed railway connecting Lhasa to Nyingchi, close to the Indian border. This railway, the highest altitude electrified line in the world, is a technological achievement that Beijing portrays as a lifeline for economic integration. It allows for faster movement of goods, people, and potentially military resources in a strategically sensitive region. Xi praised the project as evidence that the Communist Party is bringing modernization to Tibet, raising living standards, and ensuring security. Yet critics point out that such projects often benefit Han Chinese migrants and state-owned enterprises more than ordinary Tibetans. Moreover, infrastructure expansion is also seen through the lens of geopolitics, particularly with India, given ongoing tensions between the two Asian giants in the Himalayan border areas. Xi's itinerary also included visits to Buddhist monasteries, where he was shown paying respects to religious symbols while simultaneously emphasizing the importance of aligning Tibetan Buddhism with socialism with Chinese characteristics. Beijing insists on controlling monastic education, appointing key religious figures, and dictating the role of religion in public life. For Tibetan Buddhists, however, such interventions represent an erosion of their centuries-old traditions and spiritual independence. The looming issue of the Dalai Lama's succession remains unresolved, with Beijing declaring it has the authority to approve his reincarnation, a claim rejected by Tibetan religious leaders and the global Tibetan community. Xi's visit, therefore, highlights the delicate balance Beijing seeks to maintain, projecting respect for local culture while tightly controlling its practice. Reports from Tibetan exiles and advocacy groups indicate that Xi's visit was accompanied by heightened security, surveillance, and restrictions on movement. Foreign journalists are rarely granted access to Tibet, and the region remains tightly sealed to independent observers. The timing of the visit, coinciding with the anniversary of Chinese rule, was no coincidence. It underscores Beijing's sensitivity to dissent and its desire to preempt any form of protest. Local sources suggest that Tibetans were required to participate in staged events, waving flags and chanting slogans to welcome the president. Such displays are common during official visits but often conceal the underlying resentment many Tibetans feel toward the state's policies. Xi's rare trip has drawn attention from the international community, particularly human rights organizations that continue to criticize China's policies in Tibet. Groups such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International argue that Beijing's claims of modernization and prosperity mask systemic abuses, including arbitrary detentions, restrictions on freedom of expression, and the erosion of cultural identity. Western governments, including the United States, have long condemned China's human rights record in Tibet, while Beijing dismisses such criticism as interference in its internal affairs. Washington's 2020 Tibetan Policy and Support Act, for example, explicitly states that only Tibetan Buddhists can determine the reincarnation of their religious leaders, directly challenging Beijing's stance. Xi's visit, therefore, can be read as a defiant message to the West, that China remains firmly in control of Tibet and will not compromise on sovereignty issues. Tibet occupies a critical position in China's national security calculus. Bordering India, Nepal, and Bhutan, the plateau is strategically vital for controlling water resources, military access, and border defense. The recent military tensions between China and India in Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh have only heightened the importance of Tibet as a geopolitical buffer. By showcasing development projects and demonstrating personal presence, she signals both domestically and internationally that Tibet is an inseparable part of China. This message resonates with Chinese nationalism, particularly at a time when Beijing faces multiple external challenges, from tensions with the United States to disputes in the South China Sea. Xi's trip to Tibet also ties into his broader agenda of building a strong, unified nation under the banner of the Chinese Dream. His government has tightened control over ethnic minorities, not only in Tibet but also in Xinjiang, where Uyghurs face sweeping restrictions, mass detentions, and re-education programs. By visiting Tibet, she seeks to reinforce the idea that all ethnic groups must align with the Communist Party, prioritize national unity, and subordinate local identities to a shared Chinese identity. This reflects his push for ethnic fusion, a policy critics argue undermines cultural diversity in favor of assimilation. Ultimately, Xi Jinping's rare visit to Tibet sends several messages. To Tibetans, it is a reminder that Beijing's grip remains firm and that demands for greater autonomy will not be entertained. To Chinese citizens, it reinforces the narrative that the Communist Party is delivering modernization, stability, and prosperity to even the most remote regions. And to the international community, it is a statement of defiance: Tibet is not up for negotiation. For Tibetans in exile, however, the visit reopens old wounds. Many see it as a continuation of policies that have suppressed their language, religion, and traditions for decades. The Dalai Lama, now in his late 80s, continues to advocate for the middle way of genuine autonomy rather than outright independence. Yet with Beijing refusing dialogue and insisting on absolute sovereignty, the gap between the two sides remains as wide as ever. Xi Jinping's rare visit to Tibet on the 60th anniversary of contested Chinese rule was more than a ceremonial gesture. It was a calculated display of power, nationalism, and strategic intent. By emphasizing development, showcasing infrastructure, and projecting ethnic harmony, she sought to present Tibet as a success story under Communist Party leadership. But beneath the official imagery lies a more complex reality, one marked by cultural suppression, human rights concerns, and a deep sense of alienation among many Tibetans. As Beijing continues to strengthen its hold, the prospects for genuine reconciliation remain distant. For now, Tibet stands as both a symbol of China's rise and a reminder of the costs of centralized power over diverse identities.